Welcome back to Sunday School, everyone. I'm Jared Anderson, and this is Engaging Gospel Doctrine, episode 353, Reading the Book of Mormon, which follows the Come Follow Me material for Book of Mormon Week 1. I'm in denial. I cannot believe that we are coming up on 2020. I find it significant that, as President Nelson reminded us, we will be celebrating 200 years from the Restoration for the next decade. Also, confession, when I was younger, I thought that Jesus, the second coming, was going to be in like 2030 or 2034. No, what would it, or somewhere around there, like 2,000 years after Jesus's death or appearance to the Nephites or something. Anyway, we all have our pet theories. But 2020 to 2030 is going to be very, very significant. I want to announce that this is not a one-time deal. Engaging Gospel Doctrine is going to continue. Thank you so much for all of those who donated to the podcast. As I imagined would happen, the bulk of the listeners contributed about 2/3 of our goal, and then a single generous listener donated the rest. I was really touched. She told me to contact her on Christmas, and whatever remained to our goal, she would contribute. So everyone owes a debt of gratitude to her. Let's get right into this year. We are covering the Book of Mormon, and this first lesson is pretty much an overview, or rather an introduction, and I hope that everyone will get a sense of what is your starting point with the Book of Mormon? What is your relationship like? What is it? How should we read it? I think this will be the most constructive discussion that we can have in this introductory episode. So the goal of this episode is to get a sense of your relationship to the Book of Mormon and foster a healthy, constructive approach to it. The reading is the introductory sections to the Book of Mormon, which in our current edition includes the title page, Introduction, 3 and 8 Witness Testimonies, and a brief explanation about the Book of Mormon. The outline for this episode is I will talk about an overview for the year, the goals of the podcast, and for the lesson, I suggest that we talk about and explore what is your relationship to the Book of Mormon? What is the Book of Mormon? How do we approach the Book of Mormon? What are our priorities when it comes to the scriptures? What are some introductory questions? Look at the reading, and then I will talk about recommended resources and conclude. I have included in our lesson notes a full schedule of the year and which sections will be covered in Sunday school. I couldn't find a schedule put out by the church, so I put one together. We have 22 Sunday school weeks this year. We are reading the entirety of the Book of Mormon in segments, which I'm glad for. And yes, I still want to put out the Missing New Testament episode. I'm just prioritizing as needed. So this January 5th, we cover the introduction. January 19th, 1 Nephi 8 through 10. February 2nd, 1 Nephi 16 to 22. February 16th, 2 Nephi 6 through 10. March 1st, 2 Nephi 28 to 30, and so forth. As I said, the lesson notes contain all of these. The goals for the podcast: on my side, I commit to staying 2 weeks ahead the entire year. By putting it out today, we are about a week and a half ahead, and I will keep pushing so I can keep high quality episodes out the entire year in enough time for you to make use of it. And a goal that you can have and that all of us can have is to keep fundraising sustainable and to increase the listenership and the reach of this podcast. I hope to trigger a virtuous cycle so that as I continue to contribute reliable, high quality content, you will be motivated to share that. So this is something that we can work on. What is the Book of Mormon, and what approach are we going to take this year in this podcast? I'm a really big fan of each of us contributing our specialized gifts. I'll be me, you be you, and I really believe that as we contribute these differing complementary gifts, we can all build up the kingdom together. We had a discussion in the Facebook group where a friend of mine asked, "What is the Book of Mormon?" And a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but also fully seriously, my answer for what the Book of Mormon is worth reading. The Book of Mormon is worth reading. I think that is a very powerful foundation and starting point. My favorite solutions are the ones that work with elegant efficiency. And I propose an approach to the Book of Mormon that works no matter what you believe about it. So that is an approach that we're going to take. I propose that we take the Book of Mormon seriously, and we allow it to be literal, and we also take seriously the fact it was produced in the 19th century. Let me break down those pieces. So first, take it seriously. As I said, the core of my testimony of the Book of Mormon is that it is scripture, it is worth reading. It rewards careful, diligent, repeated study. I think the Book of Mormon is inspired. I think it comes from God. And I think that we need to allow it to be literal. Now, I believe that the Book of Mormon is worth reading whether or not you believe that it is literal or historical. But I think part of taking the Book of Mormon seriously and taking the place that it has in church culture seriously is that we cannot be dismissive of the way that it presents itself. And so again, I think that as we read it, we need to enter the world of the Book of Mormon, and we need to allow it to be real. Richard Bushman says, "I live as if Joseph Smith is as a prophet." And I propose that we read the Book of Mormon as if it is literal and it really happened. I think this is the way to most powerfully engage with the Book of Mormon. At the same time, I also believe that we need to take very seriously its 19th century features. No one can deny the fact that the Book of Mormon, as we have it, was produced in the 1820s. All of us can agree on that. And as a starting point, I recommend that we acknowledge the English Book of Mormon as we have it is not what was on the plates. Can anyone disagree? Because if you disagree, that means that the plates would have been in English. And no one believes that. So again, this is systematic theology. I really like taking this starting point that again, the Book of Mormon, as we have it, comes from the 1820s, and the Book of Mormon, as we read it, was mostly put together in the 1970s and 1980s. The 1981 edition, as I understand it, was all the quads and triple combination and copies of the Book of Mormon that are distributed. By the way, that's the only way to pluralize Book of Mormon. Is it Books of Mormon or Book of Mormons? No, it's copies of the Book of Mormon. Anyway, so again, let's take seriously what the Book of Mormon is as we read it. Once again, I want to talk about priorities when we read the scriptures. And I am saying this as someone trained in scriptural interpretation. I am trained in biblical interpretation. I am trained as a textual scholar. I am trained as a historian. So I can read scripture on every level, and this is one reason why you are listening to the podcast, and one of the main things that I bring to the table when it comes to this podcast. Now, that said, I still stand by my priorities, which is this. I think as we read Scripture, our top priority should be devotional, then theological, then literary, then historical. And I personally think that really devotional and theological and literary you need because you need to understand what the text says. But I really believe that we can appreciate and benefit from Scripture, including the Book of Mormon, at just a devotional level. And one thing that ministry has done for me is I am much less of an intellectual elitist. I'm an elitist in other ways. I'm like a moral elitist now. But I really believe that anyone can benefit from Scripture, including the Book of Mormon. So let's go through each of these. Top priority, devotional. How does this text help me feel better? How does it make me be better? How does it make me become a better person? How does it help me serve others? In other words, the main purpose of Scripture, as the title page of the Book of Mormon says, it is to help us come unto Christ. It is to fulfill the purpose of the plan of salvation, which is to help us become more like our heavenly parents. It should not surprise anyone that the central purpose of Scripture is the same as the central purpose of the plan of salvation. Central purpose of the gospel, it's all the same thing. So I propose that devotional is the number one priority when it comes to Scripture. 2, theological. What does this passage or text or Scripture teach me about God? What does it teach me about spiritual reality? Now, the tricky thing is that different passages of Scripture teach different things about God and spiritual reality, and that's why we need to dig into this fundamental question of what is from God and what is from humans. What aspects of Scripture are divine and what aspects of Scripture are human? Again, I don't think anyone can disagree that Scripture is divine content revealed through humans, unless you take a completely secular approach to Scripture. And then even people who think from a secular perspective still believe in inspiration. Unless, well, I mean, I don't respect people who go further than that. So again, theological, and this is why the main motto of the podcast is challenge and be challenged by the Scriptures. And this is the task of systematic theology, which is one thing I'm best at. And that is, how do we put together all the pieces of the puzzle? You know, if this passage says this about God and this passage says something else about God, how do we make sense of it? And it's like CSI the Bible. Similar to how, as a historian, I can say, okay, these texts say these things about Jesus. You know, let's say I'm a historical Jesus scholar and I want to determine what Jesus of Nazareth did and said as much as we can. The goal is, you know, which explanation or depiction of Jesus as a historical figure best explains all available evidence. Similarly, the task of theology, doctrine is the outcome. So similar to how ethics is how you come to morality, morality is the system, ethics is the process, so too doctrine is the outcome and theology is how you get to it. One tricky thing about doctrine and theology in the church is we're not very transparent about it. We know that, you know, those who are sustained as prophets are the ones who can proclaim doctrine, but it's not very often that we see people's process. We kind of have to put it together. Anyway, we'll talk about that more later. So basically, theology, it's like which conception of God and which conception of the plan of salvation best explains all available evidence, all available Scripture. So for example, with LDS theology, even though Heavenly Mother has been talked about in different ways at different times, the idea that we become God, all of us, and male and female, and that marriage is essential. These are all core Latter-day Saint doctrines. We can extrapolate that Heavenly Mother is a central and core doctrine. Does that make sense? Whatever the scriptures do or don't say. Next, literary. And again, we kind of need literary understanding to do the rest. But at the literary level, it is, what does this passage say? How does it say it? How do we understand this passage? How does it relate to other passages in scriptures? And then finally, historical. How does this passage relate to the past and present? Spoiler, everything is historical fiction at best. Even what we think of as history is just a reconstruction, and no history can be separate from the historian's biases and context and understanding. So one of my favorite ways of thinking about ideas recently is clear distinctions gently held. And by that, I do mean we need to do the very best work we can to understand things, scripture, for example. We need to have our working models and approaches, but we also need to be able to update in light of new information, new evidence. B.H. Roberts was very good at this. B.H. Roberts, in his studies, would say something like, if I hadn't had this personal spiritual experience, I would look at this scripture differently, and so forth. So the takeaway that I want to emphasize is anyone, no matter what your background, no matter what your level of understanding, I deeply believe that anyone can pray about the scriptures and benefit from the scriptures. So that is a devotional approach. And that is what I will be prioritizing, even though I will also be bringing as much to the table with my training as possible, because you listeners have given me the feedback that that is what you want. So next I want to put all of this in perspective and what I think of as order of operations. I'm all for digging in and having as much fun as possible with all of these categories. I love connecting the dots in the scripture. But when we put healthy weight on this order, the Book of Mormon and other scripture, they not only make sense, but they are resilient. So for example, if we need the Book of Mormon to be historical in order to gain spiritual benefit from it, then the spiritual benefit we gain from it will be dependent on our understanding of the relationship between the Book of Mormon and historicity. But if we put our weight on the devotional, theological, and literary aspects, and we keep historical, the historical relationships, we hold it gently, then not only will we benefit from scripture in the Book of Mormon no matter what we believe, but this is one of my favorite things, it will also allow us to have constructive conversations across belief. Isn't that fantastic? I will say very explicitly that the primary agenda that I have for this podcast is to teach the scriptures of the church in a way that the most people can benefit in a constructive way. So I want to model an approach, and it's not for everyone, and that's fine, but I want to model an approach, and I feel like I've been successful, to LDS scripture in a way that it is beneficial and constructive, and it works no matter your background, no matter your beliefs. This is an example of an approach that I call religion better than true. And I think every religion will be its best if it is so demonstrably good that it does not need to rely on its truth claims in order to justify its investments, and yet it remains recognizable to those who claim that tradition. So putting that into simple terms, my goal to approach the Book of Mormon and the church in general is to present a version or again, it's an approach to the theology of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Mormonism more broadly that an atheist can respect, but a fully active temple-going literal believer can claim and say, yeah, that sounds familiar. And I will also share that my own journey, has, I've had my own faith journey over the last 7 years that I've been doing this podcast. I hope I'm not in the same place as I was 7 years ago. And I'm grateful to still be able to dig in and read the Book of Mormon. So again, that's my agenda. Okay. So Book of Mormon inventory, feel free to come up with your own to share. Here are some of the questions that I recommend discussing in class or wherever you're talking about this. 1, how would you describe your relationship to the Book of Mormon? 2, who is your favorite character? 3, what is your favorite story? 4, who is a character that you struggle with or dislike? 5, what is a story that you dislike or struggle with? 6, what part of the Book of Mormon has helped you the most? And 7, what do you most appreciate about the Book of Mormon? And again, I feel that these are questions that anyone can constructively and respectfully engage with. And again, this is largely my approach to religion in general. I mean, I am an interfaith chaplain. And as I said, as I've shared before, I feel like my main flock and main target for my gifts is to help people who struggle with current approaches to religion feel the benefit of religion and spirituality. I want to serve those who struggle with religion and spirituality. That is not what I'm doing primarily in this podcast. As I said, what I'm doing in this podcast is presenting LDS scripture, the scripture of my heritage and tradition that I'm most familiar with, my mother tongue, in a way that the most people can access. Again, so good and constructive that an atheist could respect it, and yet so familiar that most of you can appreciate it. As best as I can tell, over 95% of you are fully active, and based on a survey that we did, about 40% of you maybe are literal believers. Interesting stuff. Okay, I will quickly answer these questions just to give you an example. My relationship to the Book of Mormon is appreciative and respectful. Like, I really respect the Book of Mormon. I'm grateful for the Book of Mormon. And I think the Book of Mormon is worth taking seriously and really digging into it. I'm genuinely grateful for this opportunity to read through the Book of Mormon very carefully with the Sunday school curriculum. I also have nostalgia, with the Book of Mormon. I like thinking back to the many times that I've read it. I've binged the Book of Mormon before there was Netflix. I remember one Sunday when I sat down and read 3rd Nephi to the end. I've tried to read the entire Book of Mormon in 24 hours, and I haven't done that yet. So that's something I still need to do. Okay, who is my favorite character? Probably Moroni. I really appreciate the vulnerability of Moroni. I really appreciate his humility and even his sense of inadequacy. I really resonate with Moroni. I also love Alma and Jacob. I go for the sensitive souls. What is my favorite story? I love the brother of Jared talking to the Lord. I love Ether 12. I love Alma 32, King Benjamin's speech. I had an insight while preparing this episode. I love sermons. Book of Mormon sermons are my favorite genre. Not surprising, but that is a clarity that I didn't have until I did that exercise. Who is a character that I dislike or struggle with? Apart from the obvious baddies, probably Nephi. I'll get into that, but something rubs me wrong about Nephi. Again, I think he can be a compelling character, but not in the way that we normally talk about him in the church. As I will dig into very soon, I think Nephi as unreliable narrative is the most beneficial and interesting way to engage with Nephi. What is a story that I dislike or struggle with? The story of Alma and Amulek and God stopping them. I have a really, really hard time with all of the women and children dying, including, I think the text suggests that Amulek's own wife and children were in that fire. And then there's the miraculous destruction of the prison. I have a really, really hard time with that. What part of the Book of Mormon has helped me the most? Probably Ether 12. I really love Ether 12's approach to weakness, vulnerability, and human limitation, and language, because I'm a nerd. What do I most appreciate about the Book of Mormon? As I said earlier, I most appreciate how the Book of Mormon rewards repeated, careful analysis. I hope to have Don Bradley on one of these episodes. He just put out the Lost 116 Pages book that I have not yet read. I want to. And I am blown away and deeply impressed and gratified by how much you can mine from the Book of Mormon. It's incredibly impressive. Okay, let's look at the reading really quickly. Title page. What I like about the title page is how clear it is about the complexity of the Book of Mormon. The introduction, I talked with my friend Daniel about this. My understanding is that Elder McConkie wrote the introduction that we have to the Book of Mormon, and then it passed through committees. It was first in the 1981 edition. I playfully call this the Star Wars version of the Book of Mormon because it was published in 1977 when A New Hope came out, and it's also gold. I really love that version. It does not have the introduction. The 3 and 8 witnesses, it's worth being aware of the complex histories to the witnesses. I also appreciate the additional witnesses that Grant Hardy adds in his Reader's Edition. He also puts them in the Study Book of Mormon. My copy has not yet come, but I really love how he includes Emma Smith's witness of the Book of Mormon as well as Mary Whitmer's. So for example, this is Mary Whitmer's witness of the Book of Mormon. It says, "Sometimes after this, Joseph Smith's moved to Fayette, New York in 1829, my mother was going to milk the cows, and she was met out near the yard by the same old man, judging by her description of him. This was an angelic messenger who had transported the plates from Harmony, Pennsylvania to Fayette, who said to her, 'You have been very faithful and diligent in your labors, but you are tired because of the increase of your toil. It is proper, therefore, that you should receive a witness that your faith may be strengthened.' Thereupon he showed her the plates. My father and mother had a large family of their own. The addition to it, therefore, of Joseph, his wife's Emma, and Oliver Cowdery very greatly increased the toil and anxiety of my mother. And although she had never complained, she had sometimes felt that her labor was too much, or at least she was perhaps beginning to feel so. This circumstance, however, completely removed all such feelings and nerved her up for her increased responsibilities. I have heard my grandmother say on several occasions that she was shown the plates of the Book of Mormon." This is recounted by David Whitmer, her son, and her grandson, John Whitmer. "I have heard my grandmother say on several occasions that she was shown the plates of the Book of Mormon by a holy angel, whom she always called Brother Nephi. She undoubtedly refers to Moroni, the angel who had the plates in charge. It was at the time, she said, when the translation was going on at the house of the elder Peter Whitmer, her husband." It's just really fantastic stuff. I love. And I think it's really productive to, the witnesses are great. I think it is most productive to focus on what is your witness. What is your witness of the Book of Mormon? And how does that fit into your life? The church also has a topic, the witnesses of the Book of Mormon, that I have linked to. And then we have a brief explanation about the Book of Mormon. This is also a 1981 feature. The 1977 version has a brief analysis of the Book of Mormon that talks about the different plates that went into the Book of Mormon. I really like how self-aware the Book of Mormon is. My specialty when it comes to the Bible is how the Bible came to be, what is the history of biblical composition. And so I am very delighted by how transparent the Book of Mormon is about the different components of it. Okay, now I want to go into the recommended resources. I have not yet looked at all of these, but I will be weighing in as we move forward this year. So of course, there are new church resources, the Come Follow Me material, and then we have some new Book of Mormon videos that I look forward to watching. There is the Study Book of Mormon by the Maxwell Institute, also done by Grant Hardy. Grant Hardy is fantastic. I'm a big fan. I will link to the episode that I did with him introducing the Book of Mormon, so you can go back. In fact, I will reissue that as its own episode because it's excellent. And one of my favorite things about context is Grant Hardy had to very courageously put out this edition. It is published by the University of Illinois Press. And he was given a very hard time. He also donated all of the royalties, I think to the Humanitarian Fund, because he thought it was inappropriate for him to gain any money off a version of the Book of Mormon. And so I am delighted that now that work and more is found in an official church-supported edition of the Book of Mormon. I'm just delighted by the progress that demonstrates. Understanding the Book of Mormon, also by Grant Hardy. This kind of has different vignettes and he explores different aspects of the Book of Mormon. It is excellent. Like, all the areas that he covers are very worthwhile. By the Hand of Mormon by Terrell Givens is very good. I love the fact that member scholars can be published by Oxford and university presses. And this is one thing that really struck me. I need to get the Penguin edition of the Book of Mormon. One of the UNC professors that I know, Dr. Lori Mathley Kipp, she wrote the introduction to the Penguin edition of the Book of Mormon. And all of the scholars, the academic scholars of the Book of Mormon, whether they are members or not, have a very similar testimony, which is the Book of Mormon is worth taking seriously and worth the title of Scripture. And this is one reason why it is the bedrock of my testimony of the Book of Mormon. And I really appreciate, my fundamental testimony of the Book of Mormon is that it is worthy of the title Scripture and it brings me closer to God. And for me, that's good enough. And everything else is a bonus. Okay, so there's Scripture Plus by Book of Mormon Central. I'll be taking a look at that. There's also an app called Scripture Plus. The Book of Mormon Brief Theological Introductions, also put out by the Maxwell Institute, are not yet out, as best as I can tell. I'll be looking at that. The Book of Mormon Made Harder by Professor James Falconer is available as a free PDF, so that's fantastic. I've linked to that. The Book of Mormon, A Brief Introduction, or it's a very short introduction. I love this series. I have about 15 of them. I think they're so delightful. Terrell Givens did this as well. And then, as I said, Don Bradley just put out the Lost 116 pages, which were much more than 116 pages. And he mines an unbelievable amount of information about the portion of the Book of Mormon that we don't have. I'm going to tease Don that his next book needs to be on the sealed portion of the plates. So that's fantastic. Again, in conclusion, my goals and hopes for our relationship with the Book of Mormon is that we will all come closer to God as we read it and feast upon it this year. I hope that we will become better disciples, better humans. I'm grateful to be on this journey with you. Again, thank you so much for supporting the podcast. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Engaging Gospel Doctrine. And thank you for letting me be on this journey with you. I've said before that this podcast is not about me, it's about the scriptures. And I hope that this devotional and contextual approach to the Book of Mormon has been helpful for you. And I look forward to exploring the Book of Mormon with you this year.